here. I can get it. There we go. As usual, we'll start with the vision statement, and I'll go ahead and read that today. Together, we see a world where people unite and take action to create lasting change across the globe, in our communities, and in ourselves. Just a reminder to everyone to please mute if you're not speaking. And then I'm going to turn it over to Suzanne, who will introduce our speaker.
Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, I think now. I'm in my car, so if I break up, there's a nice introduction for Lena here. Can you hear me? Would you raise your hand so I can see? Mary, if you can hear me, great. Thank you. I'm in sort of a dead spot. I'm coming back from the beach and I apologize, but I just was so excited that Lena could come and speak to us today. As she mentioned, if some of you were on, we first met, our church had a book group, and Lena has written a book called Hot Dogs on the Road that she will talk to us about. And I met her there, and she's also a dear longtime friend of my dear friend, Brenda Miller. And so I'm just claiming her as my own because I just was so moved by her book and getting to know her. What a fine and wonderful person. She lives near Asheville, and she lives in a beautiful home that overlooks the mountains called High Heaven. I love that. And she has a wonderful dog named Mercy that keeps her company there. She has two lovely daughters. One lives in Durham near us, and the other, I believe, is in Virginia. Is that right, Lena?
Yes, Yorktown.
And she has grandsons, and they all around each other. And I always like to hear what Laura, her daughter, is cooking because she's the chef. She used to work at the Magnolia Grill with Ben and Karen Barker before, and now she's on her own. So if we need something to eat, we should call her because her food is to die for.
Thank you for the plug.
But Lena grew up, I'm sorry, my birds are talking. I've got two parakeets in here. She grew up near Robinsonville, and I believe her background is it Cherokee, Saponi, and Lumbee?
Yes.
Yes. And her grandparents lived a little bit further away, and I'll let her tell you how she got the title of her book. But she thought it was really important to write this so her daughters would know what it was like in the Jim Crow era in North Carolina. I think we still have a great deal of that now, unfortunately. But superimposed on top of that was even worse regulations and treatment of people who were indigenous people here. I'm so happy to say that she was Meredith Angel. She was the first indigenous woman to come to Meredith, and she got a degree in education. But she's just recently been appointed to the Board of Trustees for Meredith, and I'm just so pleased. How wonderful that is. I don't want to take up any more time, and after you hear her, if you would like to get a copy of her book, I will help facilitate that if anybody's interested. I think you can order it from Amazon, but she probably will tell you that too. But thank you so much for joining us, Lena, and we would love any time to have any of your friends and you here come and join us. George Harry, who's in my regular Rotary Club, Carrie Page, plays tennis with Lena and her husband, who's now in heaven watching over us, down at Hilton Head, and he said she's really a excellent tennis player. So I reminded George, he's probably forgotten, he said he's coming today, he and Gina, so they may pop in to hear what you have to say. But thank you so much for being here. I'm so honored, and we're so glad you're here, Lena.
We're here, Suzanne. Hey,
Good
Lena.
job.
Hey, George. Hey, Gina. And you exaggerated on tennis. I mean,
No.
You were wonderful. So was Jim.
Oh, we had fun with tennis and with you all. Am I on now?
Yes.
Am I to start?
Yes,
Yeah.
go.
Please.
You are.
Okay, well, I've already made a mistake. I have trouble with time, and I should have a watch right here, and I don't. So will somebody give me the, I think I have like about 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Somebody give me a hands up and say, look, you've got 5 minutes, 3 minutes. Okay.
I'll do that, Lena.
Okay. Thank you. I am just more than delighted to be with this group. As I said, one of my passions has always been, we didn't call it social justice then, but I've always termed it educating others about my people and about my life and why and how that has impacted me. So let me just start by saying I was born in Lumberton, the county seat of Robeson County down east. It's, if you go down 95, it's the last county in North Carolina before you get to south of the border. And some heads are shaking, you know where that is. It's hot. And it was hot in many ways. It was a hot climate, and it was hot racially. One of the interesting things about Robeson County, it was written up even when I was a child, that we had trifecta segregation. And that means simply that we had 3 groups of people living in the county. And the 3 groups of people were whites, blacks, and browns. And the browns at that time were American Indians. We also, those groups of people were about equally equal in numbers in the county. But back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, when I grew up, the power base was all white. And people have said over and over again, how could that be? Well, it could be that way because of Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow laws were those laws that were established in many states, North Carolina, one of them, that legally separated people, activities, jobs, schools by race. And it was nothing to be taken lightly. It was the law, and it was also the social norm of the day. And what's also interesting is it was a way of life that had been there for a long time. And so the topic was a silent topic, unless you were with a group of friends or at some churches. And those churches who talked about segregation and the meanness and the demeaning of it and the tier part of it were primarily Black churches. So it was a time of silent segregation. Not like today, where how we treat others is all over the news. It wasn't that way. You ask why? Well, when you don't have people in office to affect change, how are you going to change? And when this has been the case for a very, very long time, it becomes the norm. It's just the way it is. If I heard that one time, I heard it thousands of times. You accept it as wrong. and you hope for another day. And how you accept it generally affects you for years to come, decades to come. Okay, so I grew up, I had a mom and dad. I was blessed, they were blessed to both have received college educations. My mother was from, she was actually born in the community that I lived in as a child. But when she was a child, they moved to another community, and then her parents ended up in Pembroke, which you may know about is the home of the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. It is also in a tiny, tiny town in Robinson County. And then and now, many people view Pembroke as the heart of Indian country in North Carolina. And for one reason, particularly because of the college that was established there back in the 1900, mid-1900s. And it was a college just for Indians. You know, Jim Crow, just for Indians. And it was the only state-supported school for Indians in the nation at that time. So my dad was born in Person County. Do you know Person County? Roxborough, north of Durham. A tiny Indian community there that straddled the North Carolina-Virginia line. And he, back at that time, public education, perhaps for everybody, ended at 7th grade. And there was no high school for Indians there. And through divine intervention, someone knew about this group of Indians and went to Person County and recruited people to come to Pembroke to finish high school. And my dad was the only one who went from that community. And he ended up being the first Saponi person to receive a college degree ever. His degree was from a Methodist-related college in Illinois. That was arranged by a Methodist minister he got to know, he lived with while he was finishing high school in Pembroke. Okay. So then I had two baby brothers who were just like little devils, and 14 months apart, and me. We lived on the school grounds of Magnolia School, where my dad was principal. It was a union school, grades 1 through 12. It was an Indian school. All of our teachers, except a music teacher, were Indians, all of whom had attended college, it was called at the time. Okay, so the details of my life are in the book, and I'm going to tell you why I wrote it. When Jim and I were married, we had two daughters mentioned, and they were 8 years apart. So it was like having two only children, because you did the same thing again 8 years later, including when we would go down to see my parents with Laura. Laura was the only grandchild on my dad's side, or she was the only grandchild that my parents had. And so Laura was an angel before she was born, according to them. And we would visit, and as she grew, you know, we would go into Lumberton. We lived in the country. And she would ask the normal questions. Mommy, did you go to the movie theater we're going by now? And I said, oh, yes. But we didn't go into the main floor that you see. We walked around to the side and went up into the balcony. And the balcony was divided into two areas and was divided by a low, maybe 3 foot tall partition. That's one side was for Indian people and the other side was for Black people. There was no bathroom there. There were no Cokes or Pepsis to buy and no popcorn. When you went there, you saw the movie. And even at a very young age, she would say, Mommy, why did you do that? Why did you go downstairs where the popcorn was? And I said, because we couldn't. There was a law that said that we couldn't. Black people and brown people and white people could not sit next to each other. And she was like, oh, that's crazy. Yeah, it was crazy. And similar things happened. She asked, about the school where my dad was principal, and she said, so did your friends come home? Did you play after school with your friends? And I'm like, no. All the children who came to this school rode buses to the school. Some of them from as far away as 40 miles to get to the school. And so they went home and they had to work on the farm. And when I got like 10, 11, 12, I had to make sure my brothers weren't tearing down the house. That was my job. And that was repeated with Laura and Lindsay. And I never will forget one of the first times that Laura remembered going to our little church. She said, Mommy, why does your preacher holler when he's preaching? And I'm like, well, he's that's just his style. That's the way he does it. She said, I don't like this man. He's loud. And we had a little talk about that. The bottom line was, with both daughters, I told them many facts about what my life was growing up. Many facts. The thing I did not talk to them about were feelings. How did that make me feel? How did it affect large groups of people to be discriminated against? And one of the reasons I didn't do that was that I was married to Jim Brooker, who my mother said was a Yankee from up north. And actually, he was from the Shenandoah Valley, and he was white. And she said, oh, and he's Catholic too. And my mother was, I reminded her that Richmond had been the capital of the Confederacy. So I didn't really think that was up north, and she knew that. But what she said was, well, anything north of North Carolina is up north to me. And I was married to a white guy, big guy, who in his growing up had never met an Indian, American Indian, and had this wonderfully stereotyped view of what life for Indians was like. Why wouldn't everybody love you? You'll find out. And I didn't want my daughters to grow up hating white people. I didn't want my daughters to grow up hating any group of people based on the color of their skin. And I had seen that. experienced that with friends who hated, they were taught to hate white people. And I understand that. When you've been discriminated against, demeaned, diminished for so long, but I just couldn't believe it. So many years later, I'm like, I want my girls to know the full truth about growing up, the burdens and the blessings of being brown and a black and white girl. I want them to know about the tears and the triumphs. And none of us have time to sit down and talk this out forever. I mean, we had talked more as they got older, of course. But there were still things that I did not share with them. So I decided to write it. And I knew immediately what the title of the book was going to be. Hot Dogs on the Road. Because that activity represented one of the big aspects of being brown, in that you cannot stop and go into a restaurant and be served. And as children, we were excited about it. It was time, a special time, a picnic on the road. Oh, joy. Because your mother always bought something you usually didn't get when you were at home, like store-bought cookies. And that afternoon, I thought about what areas of life would I want to talk my children to know about, what my childhood was like. I wanted them to know about my parents and grandparents. As I said before, they knew a lot of details, but they were not the negative things. In order to fully understand a person's heart and hopes and fears, you have to get real. You have to tell the truth. You know, there's that biblical verse about the truth will set you free. Well, it will help you set you free mentally. To be set free completely, it takes a whole lot of people and a whole lot of courage. So I write down things like my parents, my grandparents. I wrote down things like what it was like to be innocent as a child and have no idea. Awareness. What were some representative things when I became very aware of the power of discrimination? What was my community like? The church, the school. What did we do for fun? And then what was my college life? Now, mind you, this is not and never was meant to be a total autobiography. Nobody would want to do that. And there's a lot I wouldn't want to tell anyway. But I wanted my girls to get glimpses of my life in all those big categories. And I wanted, as I realized as I was thinking about this, to honor my parents, who were very unusual people in my opinion, wise beyond anything that I could be. I wanted to honor our ancestors by recognizing that while these stories are mine, similar stories and experiences were shared by many, many other Indian people in North Carolina. And so I had the outline of the book, the title and the outline before I started. And everybody says, oh, that's not the way people normally write the book. I'm like, I know that, but it worked for me, and it made it easier for me. So I sent some stories to a very well-known North Carolina book publishing company with the high hopes that it could be produced by a North Carolina company. After all, it's about North Carolina. And I waited expectantly to hear from them, and I did. And the first couple of sentences were very promising. Oh, wonderful stories. We are really interested in what you have to say. And then the bomb hit. But what we'd like you to do is sort of go back and edit them and make them a little bit happier. The stories a little bit happier. They're awfully, sort of sad. And they went on to give me the names of a couple of well-known North Carolina authors and some others in the South who had written blockbuster books. And they said, sort of in the style of so-and-so. And I'm like, no, I don't think this is going to work, because these aren't made up stories. This is about my life. And so when I shared that with my husband, he's like, I won't tell you what he said. What the? He said, no, don't even try to find a publisher in North Carolina if they didn't accept it. And they pride themselves on publishing North Carolina authors. We'll just do this ourselves. And I'm like, we don't really have money to do this. And he says, Lena, you need to write the book. It needs to get out, not just for our girls, but for other people. Just you write, and I'll figure out the rest. Thank you. And that's what we did. So the other, one other big setback is that I was not a trained writer, and I was very insecure about my writing. So a relative of mine who I absolutely admired, adored, beautiful, well, 2 master's degrees, I decided that I would ask her to review a couple of stories and to be honest. And so I sent them to her and waited. And finally, I got the package. If you were in an English class and wrote a paper, did you ever get one back? It was just like you could hardly see what you'd written for all the red marks. Well, that's what the first page of the story looked like. And I'm like, oh, well, this doesn't surprise me, because she has written a lot, and I knew that I needed to improve my writing. So that didn't surprise me. And as I read, I'm like, oh yeah, I get what she's talking about. But then she had written a note, a personal note. And the first sentence was something like this: Dear Lena, I am just puzzled at a couple of things. Who did you have in mind as a target audience for this book? Who do you think would even want to read about this? I hope she said, I just don't see the point of this book. People, it was like somebody had stabbed me in the heart. I mean, this was a relative. And I'm like, I guess I hadn't really been prepared for that reaction. So I took the letter, her papers. I opened my desk drawer. I put them in a file, and I never touched it for 5 years. And anyway, I was really busy. I was playing tennis a lot. We, by that time, had moved here, and well, shortly after then, we moved here, and I did lay ministry training and got hooked on gardening, and it was just like, you know, it was in the back of my mind, but whatever. So my 2 brothers came up to High Heaven for a visit. And as was the case when the 3 Epps children got together, we would all visit. Jim would be with us. Jim would get tired of hearing about the stories of yesteryear, and he would go to bed, and we would stay up half the night talking. So after Jim went to bed, my brother, whom I call the encourager, said, "So Lena, what about that book? I haven't heard you talk about that book any." And I'm like, that book's gone. I said, I haven't touched it for years. And he's like, what? And I said, told him about what had happened, told him. And he said, well, you just need to write. And I'm like, no, I'm over it. So my other brother, who had been a Navy man, and he just was so quiet, which was unlike him. He just didn't say a word. And finally he said, Lena, I think I have this figured out. He said, the story that she had first read was called The Look of Beauty. And in that story, I talked about skin color and how many Indians in that time equated lighter skin as beautiful compared to darker skin. And he said, I think that what's happened is your story brought up pain that she had not dealt with. And so for her, instead of dealing with her pain, her idea is, I don't want to hear anything about that era. You see what I'm saying? Silent segregation. The pain of it. And so my Navy brother said, so you just need to go ahead and write the book. She'll have to deal with her own pain. And you write the book. Are you promising? And I'm like, no, I'm not promising anything. Just let's go to bed. But I did write the book. And so I'm going to read an excerpt. And I will say the book, I have been touched by the reception to the book, both by my people and all people who have, not everybody's loved it, but it's been a very positive experience. And what makes me happy is that the era of silent segregation that I lived with, this book and discussions about it are making it known what my people, along with Black people, endured during the Jim Crow era. So, with that, if you haven't seen the front of the book, can you see it? Hot Dogs on the Road. An American Indian Girl's Reflections on Growing Up Brown in a Black and White World. I'm going to read an excerpt from this section called Awareness. And these several stories, and that's what they are, they're stories. You know, just, it's a book of stories about when this is the recalling of the first time that I became aware of discrimination as a child. In spite, the story is called Sicker Than Before. In spite of my generally healthy childhood and dislike of resting, I did get sick occasionally. Most often, I suffered from what some in the family called bad tonsils, and that the doctor diagnosed as tonsillitis. It was a school day, and I was no more than 8 years old when I was sick. 8 years old. Daddy and I climbed a long flight of narrow steps to reach the doctor's office in a building located across from the Robeson County Courthouse on Elm Street, the main street in Lumberton. As I watched the people, my dad talked to the office staff. When he returned to where I was sitting, he said we'd have a wait before the doctor could see us. He then asked if I thought I'd be comfortable alone while he walked a couple of blocks to the bank to attend to some school business. Remember, he's a school principal. And remember how many years ago it was. It's okay to leave your daughter in the doctor's office. Nobody's going to kidnap her. He assured me that I didn't need to be afraid of being alone. With that, I agreed to stay. I knew how to behave. I would sit quietly and look around at all the other people. I would read a magazine or a book if one were in my reach. Maybe I would get lucky and get a child's Bible that had pictures of Jesus and the disciples in it. I would like that. But I knew I wouldn't get up and walk around. That wasn't part of behaving well when you were away from home, according to my parents. For a short time, I looked at the people in the room, in the waiting room. I became aware that all the people had pale skin, and I was the darkest person in the room. But so what? That's just the way it happened on this day, in this doctor's office. Abruptly, a door opened, and a nurse dressed in all white came out and began to call people's names. She scanned the room, and her eyes seemed to rest on me. I began to get a bit nervous. I didn't want to go back to see the doctor without my dad. I didn't know what to say to the doctor. Please don't call my name, I thought. And she didn't. The nurse continued to look in my direction, and I believe she was staring at me. I began to get uncomfortable. Then I became fearful. Something in this woman's eyes made me want to leave, to run, to hide. But I could do none of those things. I'd promised Daddy I'd wait for him to return. Quickly, the nurse walked to where I was sitting, stopped in front of me, and demanded in a loud voice, "What are you doing in here?" I was too scared to reply. I thought everyone knew why we were there. We were sick. "What are you doing in here?" she said in an even louder voice. The voice sounded mad. By now, it seemed that everyone in the room had turned their eyes to me. My dad brought me to see the doctor. A tiny, soft voice replied, "Was that me talking?" And without warning, tears began to fall from my eyes. They matched the size of my voice. Tiny, tiny, with barely any weight to them at all. "Well, you are in the wrong room. You don't belong in here. You must leave this room now. You are in the wrong room." The nurse stopped speaking and continued to stare at me for what seemed to be about an hour. Finally, she turned and walked away from me. Oh God, I was scared. I was humiliated. I was afraid. I thought I would die on the spot. I felt nauseated. I was terrified and I was embarrassed. But more than anything, I was confused. I will share with you that my daughters were so excited when the book was published, and they made certain that they got copies 1 and 2, and were so excited they said about reading the book. And 10 days, 2 weeks later, I talked to each of them individually. I talked to my younger daughter first. And she didn't bring the book up. So I said to her, "Have you started reading the book?" And she said, "Yes, ma'am." And I said, "Well, what did you think?" And she said, "Well, when I got to page whatever it was, 47, she said, I had to put the book down." And she said, "I'll have to go back and read some more later." I had a very similar conversation with Laura. The page they got to where they both stopped is what I just read. And that affirmed for me what I had known would happen if I had told them all the negative stuff at a younger age. They would have not only been hurt, they would have been so angry that their lives would have been changed. I will stop now and just say that my dad handled the situation really well, as he always did. He let me know that I did belong in that room. He let that office staff and that nurse know that they were wrong. But he did it in a way, because I was there, I heard him. He did it in a way that taught me that oftentimes the best way to deal with pain in bad situations is through words that you will not regret later. He put them in their place, but he did it in a way that didn't malign who he was. He didn't use curse words, but that never happened again. And I'm sure it would never happen again to anybody else who was around. Having said that, my time's up. I think, do I understand that you all can ask questions?
Yes. So does anyone have a question for Lena? You want to raise your hand? Carol?
So how did you finally get the book published? How did you do that?
I researched independent publishing houses
Mhm.
where you pay to have the book published. I chose a publishing company that had a full service. You could have proofreaders, you could have editors. They would do if you chose, they could do the layout for you. They could produce a cover for you. My experience was, this was a God thing. I know that He led me to the right people. And my cover was done by a friend of mine, a childhood friend. I had told her many years before I ever started writing the book that I was going to write this book, and when I did, I wanted her to paint a picture for the cover. She was, still is, she's deceased now, unfortunately, but she was one of the premier Lumbee artists, and a couple years younger than I am, went to the same school I did. But I had excellent, I had chosen a really good company.
Good.
Suzanne? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Carol. No, okay. Suzanne?
Thank you. I had to unmute. Lena, would you comment just a second about your experience student teaching at Meredith?
Yes, I would be happy to. As Suzanne told you, I was the first American Indian to graduate from Meredith. I was also the first person of color to graduate from Meredith. And so my major was education, as you know. Remember when this was, there were not a lot of other professions to go into. And it was my senior year. In the fall, I was so happy to reach that point. I struggled my first couple years, especially my first year, and sort of got the hang of the fact that I was going to have to study real hard and not party all the time. And so my the Department of Education, who was Dr. Reevely at the time, called me in for a conference in the fall of my senior year. And I was puzzled because I knew my grades were good and, you know, whatever. But I went. And so the bottom line was he told me that Meredith students did their student teaching in either the city of Raleigh or Wake County schools. I mean, that was just how it was done. And so Dr. Reevely called me in and said, are you looking forward to your student teaching? Yes, sir. He said, well, how would you like to do your student teaching in Robeson County? And I just lost it. Because what that meant was, and he said to me, I said, no, I will not. Absolutely not. No. My parents paid the money for me to come here. They expect me to be treated the same as any other student. And he said, well, there's a problem. Neither Raleigh or Wake County schools will want you to teach. Raleigh has said that they would not allow you to teach in a white school because they think it would be too much of an uproar. And the school board doesn't think it wise for you to teach in a black school. And so that's why I said, no. Um, I don't have a problem, Dr. Reedy. You have a problem. You and whoever. You are to find me a place to teach here, or that's it. I'm not teaching in Robinson County. And I got up and left. Walked out of the office. Went down right outside the education building and sat down on a bench and just thought I was going to throw up and faint. Because in my mind, it was possible that I had come to my senior year and would not be able to graduate if I didn't do this. And so I was just, I was in an uproar internally. I was angry. But I did student teach in Wake County. I did my student teaching 4th grade at the Cary Elementary School, and had a wonderful experience. It's interesting to know that I'm sure you would like to know that my aunt and uncle had moved from Robinson County in Pembroke in the early 50s and lived in Cary. My aunt taught in Cary at the high school. And while when they first moved there was a building called the Teacherage that was alongside the Cary Elementary School. And it was for, mostly it was for single teachers, and it was apartments, and the school board allowed my aunt and her Uncle Joe and 2 kids to live there for a year or 2 until they built a house. And so, and there were other married students who taught in Cary at various schools. But that was one of those times that Lena was not silent. Someone asked me along the line, how did you get the courage to speak up to Dr. Reedy? And I said, I'm not sure. I said, I think that by that time I had experienced so many different things of discrimination and demeaning and diminishing actions that I was just fed up. You know, I think that what people need to know that for the most part, we can only suffer in silence for so long.
Yeah.
And then no matter what our color is, we have to address it. And sometimes it comes in forms that are words, sometimes in actions, sometimes in inactions. But yeah, that was a turning point for me. I mean, it just happened spontaneous. You know, it was just like, no, you can't ruin, you'll be ruining my life if I don't get this degree. Now, all this money will have been wasted. And one of the things that at that time, back in the day, with segregation, is that when I went to Meredith, there had been one other woman who went to Meredith, but she dropped out to get married. And she was also, we're talking about skin color now, she was not dark. And so she would not have had the same emotional, mental issues that I did with color, because she could have passed for white. I don't know if she did or not. But I was the first one who lived on campus for the 4 years. And where I'm going with that is, I felt very much when I left home at 16 to go to Meredith that I had to succeed, not just for me, not just for my parents. I was a representative of my people. And so if I failed in any way, I was failing my people. Nobody said that now. Nobody said that. And my parents certainly didn't say that. But when you realize that you are doing something that no one else has done, and it's the reason you're doing it, or you haven't done it, is because of your color, your heritage, you know that people are watching. And it is, I never considered it like anything to be proud of, or that I had to do it. I wanted to go to law. I wanted to go to college. That's been my whole thing, my whole life. I just wanted people to accept me as a human being whose heritage was American Indian. I don't want to be white. I never wanted to be white. I just wanted to be me and to be free to be me. You know that old Marlo Thomas song?
Lena, thank you so much for your story, your sharing your innermost thoughts and how you've been affected during your life, what has affected you. But I think the thing that I will take away is the fact that through it all, you had a vision, you knew what you wanted to do, and you continue to strive for that. And so I, for one, thank you for that. We have run out of time, and but I want to thank you, and we all applaud. And so we have a certificate for you, certificate of appreciation.
Oh, thank you
for speaking with us today. And I will go ahead and email that to you after today's meeting. And
thank you so much.
Well, our pleasure. We're thrilled that you were here, and I'm sorry we didn't. I know, Ed, you had a question. I'm sorry we didn't have time to get to it, but hopefully Lena addressed it while she was speaking.
Well, let me give you all my phone number, Ed, or anyone who has additional questions. Let me give you my email address. It's my full name in the lower cap letters, Lena Epps Brooker @gmail.com. I would love to hear from you with any comments or questions that you have. And thank you again for inviting me. I enjoyed it, and I appreciate your warm welcome.
Thank you. We enjoyed it as well. And so, Carol, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, just some announcements. Remember the Civil Rights and Social Justice Tour coming up at the very end of the month. The information's there, and I think you've got it, but please consider that. It'll be, it's really amazing. Being from Alabama, I have been down there. I have cousins in Selma. I've been to Selma a lot. I've been to the museum there, been on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. So this should be a wonderful tour for everyone. Just other reminders, Friday, the 13th, remember that's the DisCon 22 over in Winston-Salem. So you can sign up for that, register at DACDB for that. And then of course, our upcoming programs, I think Mary's already mentioned Dr. Charles Flink will be our next speaker at the end of the month. talking about using greenways to rejuvenate some of our cities and the problems that we have there.
That's
Um,
Mike McLean's.
And then April 8th, we have Jen Foster and Jocelyn Ramirez Mendoza speaking on the program at NC State on the C3 collaboration, which is a dual admission program between NC State and 13 community college partners. And then the end of April, we have Yvette Holmes from Southeast Raleigh Promise. Anybody else have any other announcements or things they need to say before we close? If not, we'll move on to the four-way test. Who can I get to read that for us? Ed, would you read the four-way test for us to close out?
The four-way test of the things we think, say, or do. First, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Thank you very much. It was great to see everybody. Back to you, Mary.
Thank you, Lena. Again, thank you so much. We appreciate you sharing your story with us. And for everyone else, thank you for being here. And we will see you in 2 weeks. And there is a board meeting right after this. So those of you that are on the board, if you will stay on the call, and we will go ahead and I'll just end the recording and then we'll have our board meeting.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.